Without further ado, we're going to hop down to the booth, give them that green light, and talk about what's going on for Modern.
Now, I'm excited to see this Green Red Hardened Scales deck. The Bowmag Courier in particular, with the way that that this deck can add counters to its creatures, it kind of cheats on Bowmag Courier. Like, you don't have to necessarily attack to build up counters, aside from the first one. With Arcbound Ravager and Steel Overseer, that could get out of control, and I'm excited about it.
Tommy starts things off with Inkmoth Nexus, no turn 1 Hardened Scales, which is really where you get the devastating draws out of this deck. We see this deck with 1 to 2 copies of Hardened Scales, just 20 people out of nowhere. Tommy with Darksteel Citadel into Steel Overseer gets to tap that Mox Opal that is now Metalcrafted into a turn 2 Hardened Scales.
Yeah, so no real hiccup in his development there, since Overseer doesn't start with counters anyway. And so the problem with playing Hardened Scales in turn 1 was not no Hardened Scales, it was no green mana available.
Yep, absolutely. Which will now unlock his Ancient Stirrings for the following turn. One of the better cards in Modern for what it does. Requires a little bit of a deck building cost, but so powerful, digging so deep that even some clamor for its banning.
Now we have Hobbs here. We had Tomsovic on camera last round where I misspelled his name, but we're on top of it this time. And we have Hobbs, who's actually on top of his pod. Pod B has had a pair of players go 2-0, but in the other 3 pods, including Jonathan Hobbs' pod A, there was only 1 player that swept the legacy round. So he actually has a cushion already over everyone else in his group.
Hobbs will crack a fetch on the end step there and then play a shocking Hallowed Fountain, which will Lightning Helix away the Steel Overseer.
And he actually played Eldrazi post ramp in Legacy and managed to win both of his matches doing that.
Defeated Peter Tragos in Storm with the power of Chalice of the Void in round 1.
Yeah, that'll do it. And Tommy, as you saw, playing the food chain before, and now so Tommy, as we talked about in the pre-show, is one of the 2 players in the event that is playing 3 decks across the whole structure of the event that no one else is playing.
Right,
which is exciting.
The lone archetype in all 3 formats for himself, which I know you were a big fan of.
I was excited. I thought that was really neat, because it's certainly something that may not have happened at all, and yet we actually had 2 players, and Tommy with the food chain and then Green Red Hardened Scales, and we'll sit on his standard deck for now, but I'm looking forward to that one also.
Right. And by making that choice, it essentially means that as long as people didn't actually think of you as like some major threat and kind of misprepare, like there's probably the least preparation for your decks on the whole, because you're such a limited quantity in the field.
Well, the Hardened Scales is a deck that people will have taken into account.
Of course.
Even though the splashing of red will change some things, for the most part the deck is expected. His other 2 are on the fringes.
Yeah, much more on the fringes. We do have, for example, the other traditional affinity decks in the field today for the Modern format, which this deck does borrow some cards in. You're going to want Artifact Hate either way, but the play patterns from this deck are vastly different.
Yeah, now that we're into the Modern rounds, we can talk a little bit about what's going on in the field, and maybe not shockingly, but a little surprisingly, no players playing humans.
Right, yeah, it's very interesting actually. More and more over these last few months, the debate of which is better, humans or spirits, is really starting to lean towards one direction.
Yeah, we had no humans, and we also had no dredge. Is that correct?
No humans, no dredge,
no dredge. And that's another one that certainly for anyone that maybe was hoping there would be no dredge and skimped on Graveyard Hate, they got paid off. And for players who have 4 or 5 anti-graveyard cards, they're going to be wishing that they had been doing something else.
Nice ley lines. We see Jonathan Hobbs get rid of a Hangerback Walker with a Logic Knot for 2. And following that up with a Bowmag Courier, Tommy Tomsovic will get in for 1 and exile a card off the top of his library. Going into turn 4 for Hobbs. Hopefully going to be able to start laying some haymakers and take control of Tommy's board, which is kind of unimpressive so late in the game, or so far into the mid game here for Tommy, Hobbs has had a smattering of removal to kind of keep things under control.
So I misspoke earlier. I wasn't thinking straight when I was talking about the Bowman Courier being supercharged by the Hardened scales. It's actually completely irrelevant.
Yeah, there's no counters on that thing.
No, there's no counters. And I was thinking that you would be able to just, I mean, this is the kind of thing where you know better, but you're trying to talk and think at the same time, plus deal with other stuff and spell Tommy's name correctly. And I was thinking to myself, the Arcbound Ravager was going to allow you to throw counters on it and draw extra cards. That's not actually how it's going to work.
Not how that works.
No, it's not. But I guess thanks for not correcting me live, even though the next time, which will definitely happen, I misspeak about how something functions. Go ahead and jump in and tell me I'm an idiot.
Yeah, I was probably just not listening to you at all.
That's fantastic.
Search for Escanza for Hobbs, going to start being able to smooth out his draw even more, and still gets to leave up 2 mana for some interaction here on Tommy's turn.
Yeah, this is Hobbs being an 18 life. Into the, well, I would say we're in the mid game now. This is not going especially well for Tommy so far. I mean, if he gets a couple cards under this Bowman Courier, I mean, we're looking at the second one now. That's going to let him catch up some, and we do have Inkmoth Nexus, which can bypass the life total race.
True.
But this is, I would imagine, a little lackluster from what he might have hoped for.
I would bet we see Tommy leave up a mana for that Bowmat for the rest of the game.
Yeah, I would think so. This is also a case, though, where this Hangerback Walker, which is not useless, but certainly going to be embarrassed by Terminus, not something he has to worry about here, as there are no Terminus in Hobbs' deck. He's playing Supreme Verdicts, which of course is reasonable, but in this particular case, probably not ideal.
Path to Exile still relevant in that dynamic, though.
Yes, definitely. Path to Exile is obviously going to be great against all these interchangeable creatures that Tommy's bringing, assuming Ravager hasn't entered play.
We do, by the way, see one notable thing about Hobbs' deck list, fitting in 3 Field of Ruin into his 3-color deck, and going down to 2 Celestial Colonnades, coming into tap, just not worth it sometimes.
Sure, and that's going to benefit it tremendously here, Field of Ruin, because there are a whole group of manlands in Tommy's deck, and Field of Ruin is, I mean, it's just nice to have free, effectively, removal spells masquerading as lands.
Spell lands are pretty powerful here, as Hobbs will try and clean up the board a little bit with a Supreme Verdict.
Yeah, I mean, he'll clean up the board, but Tommy's going to draw 2 cards and have 3 tokens. So this is a necessary step for Hobbs to take control of the game, but this is not something, you're not clapping your hands yet. This is far from being over.
Yeah, I feel like Hobbs just decided that he needed to clean that up, and before Hangerback got even bigger.
Yes.
It's kind of the reasoning there. Tommy will go dig in 5 cards deep, finds a Ravager, one of the most powerful cards in the deck, and that might just be the one he slams down, and he will.
Yeah, there's actually a pair there. Something I've noticed playing Tron, and the same thing would kind of apply in other decks, is when you Ancient Stirrings, you need to be conscious of what goes to the bottom to determine, what you're anticipating drawing in the future, or whether you want to shuffle when you have an option.
Definitely.
For example, the Field of Ruin shuffles no matter what, but on the Ghost Quarter you have the option, and you can kind of try and think, do I want to shuffle in this case, or do I not? Now, Ravager with Hardened Scales, this is
very powerful.
A lot of potential damage.
Like I was saying, this deck just kind of wins games out of nowhere. Tommy Tomsovic, very familiar with how to kind of leverage his Arcbound Ravager and not go all in, per se, but very easily threatening lethal with damage or poison at this point.
Yeah, I think we might. I mean, I believe he has the kill either way, with poison or with damage here. It's just a matter of whether he's willing to run it into a lightning bolt, which would effectively lose him the game if he went for it here.
Right. Now, we see Hardened Scales in play. Just kind of explain to you why Tommy has such an obvious lethal at this point. Hardened Scales replacing every instance of putting a counter on something with a second copy of that +1/+1/+1 counter. So sacrificing a few artifacts here to grow.
And he is going for it. I don't believe he's doing these taking these minor steps unless he's going all in here. And I am immediately proving. Oh no, he is. He's going to load up the Inkmoth Nexus. And this will do it. This will finish it off unless there's a lightning bolt, and there is not, and that is going to win the game.
Wow.
That really turned around. I mean, Hobbs cast Supreme Verdict and Tommy untapped and killed him.
Yep.
With 10 poison out of nowhere. That Ravager obviously was a super big draw, and that is the way things can go. That's explosive.
Forced Hobbs to have exactly Lightning Bolt there, and he did not have it. Just the power of Ancient Stirrings into Ravager into kill you. Tommy Tomsovic taking down game 1.
And that's got to... I mean, Hobbs can't feel comfortable now playing the rest of the match after losing game 1 like that.
I just got chills. Tommy Tomsovic slamming 2 copies of Experimental Frenzy from his sideboard.
Yeah, I'm looking for. I told you I was excited about Tommy's deck list. The Experimental Frenzy out of the sideboard in a deck with as many cheap cards as Hardened Scales. I'm eager to see this play out.
It's a low land count deck. It's a low mana cost deck. It's going to be awesome if he gets to resolve it. See him bringing in a couple of Nature's Claims, which is something that Tommy gets to do against most white decks. Going to be prepared for things like Rest in Peace as well as Stony Silence. Rest in Peace obviously interacting with Hangerback Walker and the Arcbound Ravager.
Wow, and he's going to get paid off huge here. Jonathan Hobbs, with his sideboard, for the metagame, for the whole field,
yep,
has 0 copies of Stony Silence. That doesn't mean he can't win, but it's going to be tough.
0 Stonies and 0 Rest in Peace.
0 Rest in Peace. I mean, the Rest in Peace is reasonable because he has running a full set of Snapcaster Mages in the main, and while some people do run Snapcaster main and Rest in Peace in the sideboard, even though it's not maybe ideal in some scenarios,
sure,
but no copies of Stony Silence. Now, Tommy, if he knew that, would be thrilled. He's unaware of that, and in actual fact, bringing the Nature's Claims actually is probably going to hurt him slightly.
Definitely.
Because he's not, the intended target just isn't there. And I would imagine, is going to be hesitant to kill something like a Sorcerer's Canta because they'll be waiting for the Stony Silence, which
right,
just isn't coming. Hobbs does have some effective cards to bring in. He has an Abrade. He has 2 Ceremonious Rejections, which hit almost all of the relevant cards.
Yeah.
He has a Celestial Purge, which... Now, are you bringing in Celestial Purge? Because it kills Experimental Frenzy, but he very likely won't know that that's there.
Yeah, he saw from Tommy's side some Grove of the Burning Willows and some Karplusan Forest. He knows Tommy's playing red. I don't even think he would expect any red permanents. But if he cites the Frenzy, those are coming in for game 3.
Yeah. There's a Rune to Halo, which I don't off the top of my head know, so we'll bring it up. Whether or not you can name a land with Runed Halo.
I was thinking the same thing.
Check it out.
Runed Halo, obviously the card from Shadowmoor that's going to allow you to give yourself protection from a card that you name. We have that up here on screen. It just says name a card.
Okay, so that would help. Now in this last game it wouldn't have mattered because he could name Inkmoth Nexus and would have died to normal damage anyway. But that's not always going to be the case.
Sure, you're right. And notably, you can't name something like Thopter, which was relevant there. This does make you name a magic card, not a token. But it's possible this card comes in. Tommy has a number of threats in his deck, but there's some that are really heavier hitters than others, where you want to be able to insulate yourself from certain things. Final card I'm curious about out of Hobbs' sideboard is the Lyra. Do we want to just be tapping out for a 5-drop here?
I would assume no. The life gain isn't as relevant because you can die to infect damage, and it's just a big investment. I don't want to be like there. We saw. I mean, he left one land open, and Tommy still went for it and killed him. So with
Tommy's creatures get bigger than 5 pretty quickly too.
Yeah, that's another point too. Yeah, Lyra might not even be although if Lyra is unable to effectively block something, I think we're probably in a whole heap of trouble anyway. But yeah, I can't say I expect it to come in here.
I'm really sad, by the way. Tommy Tomsovic casting an Ancient Stirrings. He finds an Arcbound Ravager for himself, but he does put an Experimental Frenzy in the bottom of his deck.
Well, that's just not acceptable, really. But because we want to see Experimental Frenzy in play.
I'm very sad, exactly.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what. Hobbs can win this game, and Tommy can play Frenzy in game 3, and we'll see what happens. Tommy's starting here with a pair of Hardened Scales, which is great, as long as we have some stuff to follow up with, and it looks like we do. But still, getting this late, I mean, not late being turn 3, but right. Hobbs' counter magic is online now. Tommy chooses to start with Hardened, Hammerback Walker over Arcbound Ravager, which, I mean, you can bolt than Hammer Walker, but it's not a result that is all that happy for you.
Cracking a fetch. Mr. Hobbs will go down to, we believe, 19. But, yeah, the power of these hardened scales, Tommy Tomsovic making a 3-3, which threatens to make 3 1-1s. That's going to be exponentially more powerful than he would have been without those hardened scales.
Yeah, Tommy's draws lining up well, both in Game 1, and we'll see how it goes in Game 2, but certainly not a bad start at all.
Yeah, we said how Tommy was kind of coming out of the gates more or less slowly per se, but with double hardened scales, every threat is incredibly effective here.
Yeah, he's going to catch up rather quickly. And here we have an Electrolyze Electrolyze, a pretty strong card against traditional affinity, where maybe you can kill 2 creatures, whereas here we're hitting nothing.
Yeah, some board states where that'll just, clean up 2 tokens, clean up 2 Bulmat Couriers, but just a cycle for Hobbs.
That is, and he had the shock to do it. That's disappointing. He can't be happy about that being his play. Although, Tommy's starting out slow, but yeah, still, that's...
Tommy's draw for turn, by the way, Animation Module. We're going to get that one up on camera for you. It's a nice card from Kaladesh, which says whenever a 1/1 counter is placed on a permanent you control, you can pay 1 mana and make a servo token for your troubles. Just another excellent engine for this deck, as you're putting counters on lots of things, as well as making a 1/1 every single turn against control can be devastating.
Yeah, this card is troubling. The only thing it can't do is put a counter on a creature that has 0. So, for example, Inkmoth Nexus, once you have a Ravager or a Worker counter on it, then you could build it from there, but you can't put the initial counter on. Other than that, this card does everything.
Tommy will attack for 3 after playing out that module.
So, like we said earlier, Jonathan Hobbs on top of this group with 2 wins. Tommy tied with almost the entirety of the group at 1-1.
Post-combat, by the way, Tommy will play out that Arcbound Ravager, and Hobbs will Path to Exile in response. Do not want to give Tommy a free sacrifice outlet to create those Thopter tokens. Putting a counter on the Ravager, Tommy will pay 1 mana and get a free servo token. Well, not free, 1 mana, but
pretty good deal.
Pretty good deal. Didn't cost you a card. If you get to make a few tokens, you're in pretty good standing at this point. Hobbs will untap, finally having access to the Colonnade mana. Might have a 5th land to do something like a Teferi, but once again, very risky to tap out here. Arcbound Ravager's in play, as well as an Inkmoth Nexus. Ooh.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that this would be a turn where Supreme Verdict is as good as it can get, because many times if there's a mana untapped, then different things can happen in result. But here it was just, with Tommy tapped out, the Verdict is free and clear to clean the board up.
I think Tommy's draw for turn was another Ravager. He doesn't have a ton of artifact food to munch up for the Ravager, but it looks like a turn where he gets to get in at least a few, in fact, at this point.
Sure, yeah, and that's the animation module also can add counters to players, as long as there's one already there.
Absolutely, yep.
So we can build up, even though we can't build up on the Nexus without a... I'll just interrupt myself.
Please do.
Experimental Frenzy has hit the board, and, well, let's see.
Tommy has 4 non-land permanents in play that are all devastating against Hobbs.
It's an exciting time to be alive with Experimental Frenzy in play. Nothing happening that turn, but Hobbs has to be terrified here.
For sure. Basically, Hobbs has to deal with every one of these permanents. Every threat that Tommy plays is going to be devastating for him. Tommy, unable to play cards from his hand anymore, but like you said earlier, we have a 0-mana Welding Jar, going to be a free card for Tommy. Gets to find another card after that one.
Yeah, I don't mean to sound too negative on Jonathan Hobbs' chances. I'm just excited about what Tommy's got going on here. I mean, Ceremonious Rejection counters the Welding Jar, land off the top, and we'll see what else he can spin up.
You just want to see cards start flying off the top for Tommy. once again, such a low land count deck is going to be able to really just try and go off with this enchantment.
And then if Hobbs ever is able to kill the Frenzy, or if Tommy decides to blow it up, presumably by that point his hand will be stacked with replacement threats.
Looks like he found something up there. It's going to be 2 mana for a Walking Ballista. Now, what would be a 1/1 Ballista is going to be a 3/3, thanks to some Hardened Scales in play. Tommy also going to get the option once again to pay a mana once it resolves and make a servo if he so chooses.
Yeah, and again, this is not again, but this is a spot where Tommy could reasonably play the Ballista as a much larger creature, but he wants to be able to just throw cards off the top of the deck into play and doesn't want to spend his mana on. He doesn't need bigger creatures.
Yeah.
He just wants more.
This 3/3 is going to be good enough. Going to be able to machine gun Hobbs' face or whatever else he might have to. It's out of range of something like an Electrolyze. He has the mana to pump it up if he needs to, and hitting cards off the top, just the raw card advantage of getting ahead is going to be huge for Tommy.
And also, by casting the Ballista as small as he can, he's also in a spot where you can use the excess mana left over if he does get stuck on the Frenzy to just animate the Ink Moths and get in.
Notably, that second piece of text there on the module, by the way, going to allow Tommy to add counters to the Ballista for 1 less mana than the Ballista's ability, usually costing 4. We'll see Tommy do that right now, costing only 3 mana to add counters to the Ballista.
Ouch.
Doubling it in size.
This is...
For very little investment, we have a 6/6 Ballista sniping down a Snapcaster Mage.
Oh, shooting for 4, and then it looks like Tommy... So he's going to take down the Snapcaster Mage, shoot Hobbs for 4, and get a replacement land.
Oh, so he's going to... Because Tommy knew his top card, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he's going to actually choose to eschew one of the points for a fetch, and you can get a shuffle on that deck.
Now, since Tommy didn't play any more cards, presumably the top card was a land.
Right.
So he's just... He would have drawn that... He's replacing that land. Effectively, he gets the land either way. He's just... Obviously, you'd rather have the land in play than drawn into your hand, even though you can't cast it. And then we're all set for... Again, Hobbs is expending resources, and Tommy isn't.
Right.
And that's kind of going to be the theme for this game.
Hobbs is going to be 0 for 1-ing all day long.
Yeah, and that's a bad way to play a control deck. But he doesn't have... Hobbs needs to find whatever he can string together to deal with these enchantments.
Now, it's very subtle here, but we see Tommy, by the way, checking his top card before he draws for turn, because he knows once that card's in his hand, he can't really cast it. So if, for example, there was some kind of instant up there that he wanted to cast, he could use that pre-draw step.
Galvanic Blast being the main... this is not a deck carrying a lot of instances, but you're correct. If there is a Galvanic Blast sitting on top of his deck, he obviously doesn't want that in his hand.
Right. Takes a draw, and we'll cast a second copy of Animation Module, which I believe will stack, actually, allowing him to make 2 servos per counter, per countered permanent, per se.
It seems like we're talking mostly about what Tommy's doing here. Jonathan really does need something to deal with this stuff, and for fans of Jonathan Hobbs, I'm sorry to say that we're looking at, in the 75, we have Teferi that can remove Hardened Scales, and we have a single copy of Engineered Explosives.
That being said, if he finds it, EE on 1 would be devastating.
It would be very strong. However, that being the only card he has to deal with this stuff, if he finds Explosives and blows it up for 1 here, would we even say he's ahead at that point?
The Frenzy will still carry Tommy.
I agree. I don't think if Hobbs draws perhaps the best card he can, I'm not sure he'd even catch up.
Absolutely. It's going to be his only, he needs to get there first. That's his starting point to get, reset here.
And here's Tommy's using the animation modules to throw poison counters onto Hobbs without even using the combat phase. And like we were saying, with no copies of Stony Silence in the sideboard, Jonathan has perhaps in his deck building chosen to ignore Affinity ignore artifact heavy decks.
Right.
And in some respects got away with it.
Mm-hmm.
There's, I believe, only 1 KCI deck in the field.
Correct.
But there is...
Maybe just, thought Double Ceremonious is good enough. Lightning Bolt, Lightning Helix is good against the traditional Affinity style decks, but Hardened Scales, a whole different animal. Arcburn Ravager is a beast, so.
I wonder if Tommy could finish this game out without even using the combat phase. He certainly could accelerate things by doing that, but he is looking so bad for Hobbs. I feel like we're repeating ourselves in two threads here. One, how much fun Tommy's side is right now, and two, how extremely dead Jonathan Hobbs looks. But we'll see. There may be, Teferi can dig him at least one permanent closer, and maybe he can assemble some kind of relevant defense. Okay, Cryptic Command bouncing the Frenzy. That is another card that gets these permanents off the board.
Or a module, right? Because Hobbs is actually dead on Tommy's turn as Tommy gets to activate. Or no, because it's only once per, right? Yeah, Hardened Scales isn't impacting the module. My apologies.
No. And yeah, so I did gloss over the fact that Cryptic Command can actually bounce the permanents on the board. It's not permanent, but it does allow him to counter them on the way back down, which is something. And honestly, it's a lot, actually.
Once again, we see Hobbs just doing a lot of cycling here, which is not what you want to be doing in the face of almost lethal here.
Cycling off Cryptic Command is tolerable, I guess, but you're right. Okay, there's the Fairy. So Hobbs is doing his best here. Unfortunately, by bouncing the Frenzy, which he almost had to do and counter on the way back down, we've now unlocked Tommy's hand, which now, I think when the Frenzy was played, we had 1 or 2 cards. Now he's got 5.
Right. One of the crazy things about this card, right, where when they want to deal with the Frenzy, but by the time they do, you have a full grip, right? So Tommy's going to get to deploy a bunch of spells before redeploying the Frenzy and be way ahead at that point.
I was super excited preparing for the last Pro Tour about Experimental Frenzy. Just the card is just very cool. It's very fun to play with, and exploring in other formats where we have free or cheap spells that have sizable impact. Oh, it's very exciting.
Yeah, we've seen this effect a few different times in Magic, playing cards off the top of the deck, but one that's so flexible at letting you cast spells and lands, play spells and lands, as well as having the ability to destroy itself once you need to actually get rid of it and use your hand again.
And it's red. Can we talk about how crazy that it's red? Oh my goodness.
I remember the beginning of our standard format, Ali Antrazi tweeted something along the lines of, I love that red gets the best threats, the best clock, the best this, the best that, and the best card draw.
Yeah. This Experimental Frenzy it's amazing and it's so cool. I can't stress that enough.
Yeah. Very cool card. Awesome job, Wizards.
So we have Tommy here navigating his post-Frenzy turn. And I wouldn't be surprised if he can cast whatever, he can almost do whatever he wants this turn. And Hobbs with 4-man up has to be thinking, I want to save my counter for the Frenzy. So Tommy can do whatever he wants before that. And he is actually going to cast a Frenzy. I actually considered the fact of whether maybe just hold it, because Hobbs is just frozen until that happens.
Tommy will play the Frenzy after playing a land from hand. Do you think it's relevant here to actually just try and hit a land off the top instead? But
actually, I do. I would have liked to see him sit on that, perhaps. Getting himself stuck for the turn is a minor drawback. Okay, we're in such good shape, but yeah, I do feel like now in Standard the rules are gonna be different in different formats. In Standard, it was pretty well accepted once things were figured out, that if you had, and there was an article written, Frank Carson wrote an article about it as well, that once you had 7 land, that you wanted to play the Frenzy first.
Oh, interesting.
At 6, there was kind of an indifference, and then at 4 or 5, then you wanted to play your land first from your hand, just based on the odds of how things would develop through your turn. Now that was based on a specific red deck. It was not based on this much lower land count affinity deck. So the fundamental turn of when you play your land first would be different, but I'm just saying that's the way it was in that regard. So here, I don't know. I would say that with a lower land count deck, you would probably be even less likely to want to play your land first.
For sure. Yeah, it's really interesting, Frank Karsten, the way that he approaches Magic so systematically.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of great articles by him about just how to the math of Magic, basically. We're gonna see the Frenzy get tucked and removed for a second time thanks to Teferi. And an untap from Tomsovic.
Apologize for that there. I don't know if you can hear that. I punched my microphone. I'm not used to all this gear.
Easy, Rocky.
Yeah, and it got in the way. But yeah, so we see the Frenzy got tucked by Teferi, which, Teferi could get knocked out at any point here. I mean, Jonathan is in better shape than he was, let's say, 2 turns ago. But it doesn't look good.
Sure. Inkmoth Nexus activated once again. Hobbs more than halfway to lethal on those poison counters. 3 cards in hand, though. Tommy's going to really think about how he wants to play this one.
3 cards to yeah, but he's only just double activation of the module and then another double activation of the module, and it will be over.
Yep.
And he even has a welding jar, so if Hobbs does draw the explosives, he can save one of the modules, which is interesting because a lot of times, like in the dark, you would say, well, you'd save, a creature or
Sure.
something that could have, more of an impact. But right now, the animation modules are a clock on them, on their own.
When Inkmoth Nexus first came to Standard, I remember a lot about. So is Tommy. What just happened there? Tommy animated and then chose not to attack?
I think that might be actually what happened there.
Interesting.
I've actually seen that happen once before, ever, where a player animated a land and then thought better of it and just passed.
I think he went for animation, said combat, trying to see if Hobbs would cryptic. Hobbs didn't cryptic, and Tommy decided, okay, I'm not going to throw this into the colonnade.
Yeah. And that makes sense.
Yeah,
that makes sense. And it paid off because Hobbs, didn't have anything to do with the mana anyway. One reason to attack, even if you're playing a game blocked, is that Jonathan would have to spend a bunch of mana to activate the colonnade. He doesn't go for it, and Jonathan doesn't have anything to do.
A lot of talent and discipline kind of displayed here by both players after that exchange. It's interesting. It's like shows how much of this game is kind of not just on the board, just in these threats. As they play around what the potential things are. Hobbs will throw another copy of Teferi, by the way, getting a second activation for the turn, as he will get to draw a fresh card or go for a tuck.
And Jonathan does have a Field of Ruin in his hand. And like we were saying earlier, with Field of Ruin, the shuffle is not optional. And so if he can get one of the other troublesome permanents and then make Tommy shuffle before he redraws the Experimental Frenzy, that at least he's making progress. The problem is the progress being made, you can't undo the poison counters. You can gain some life back, but he can't become less sick. And the
no Tylenol here.
No, and the plague is building.
We were saying I was saying how back when Inkmoth first came to Standard, the way that this that Tommy's game here is playing out is similar to a deck that Brian Kibler played. You had your classic Infect decks, with lots of pump spells during that era, but Kibler also played a blue-black variant where you just kind of need to get one chip in and then grind the game out with Contagion Clasp and Proliferate. Very similar to what Tommy's doing here. Especially effective against Hobbs' hands of removal and counter spells. Tommy just has to tap some mana for the rest of the game here.
Yeah, and Tommy, really on top of things here, pumping his Hangerback Walker before the module gets tucked, so he gets a free, he gets the second extra token instead of just the first one.
Absolutely.
There's just a lot of value being created by these 1 mana permanents.
1 mana.
And Jonathan, in somewhat less danger of dying from infect now, although it's still tremendous, but somewhat less infect pressure. But now there's a nearly lethal Hangerback Walker on the board.
Now, we just saw Hobbs tick down the Teferi, but he will get to untap 2 lands on the end step, because he did plus the first Teferi before deploying that second copy. And on the end step here, Tommy's going to reactivate, activate once again the module, putting Hobbs to 7 poison counters, 3 short counters away from lethal. I mean, it's funny. Tommy's been so ahead for so long. Hobbs is still not dead, but it's not looking great still.
No, and it's just, how does the Jeskai control deck dig out of this? What can it do? Like we talked about, we're just kind of just almost waiting for the inevitable Hardened Scales victory here, but what does Hobbs do?
Yeah, there's no battle cruiser style magic here going on for Hobbs. He doesn't get to just untap and slam something like a Grave Titan and really take over. There's no insane turning the corner against a board like Tommy's here. Snapcaster, Vendilion, Teferi only do things in the smallest of increments.
I mean, I guess the Ruined Halo, if he brought it in, would allow him to stop the animation module from building up the counters.
It is very relevant. Yeah, you could just name animation module. Tommy would no longer be able to target Hobbs as a player and essentially continue the proliferation of Infect. Tommy going for an attack here, though, and it's not looking great.
I mean, and even if that happened,
yeah.
the Inkmoth Nexus can still just attack and add poison that way.
Hobbs needs to draw perfect for the next 17 turns.
Maybe that would be enough.
Right.
I mean, I've heard it several times in coverage in other places where, yeah, it's you get to a point where if you could stack your deck, you'd still lose. I feel like we're there.
Yeah.
Maybe not. And if the Jeskai control deck managed to turn this around and come back and win this game and go to a game 3, I mean, that would be incredible.
Right.
And the reason, of course, it would be incredible is because it seems so unlikely. But he does get the Field of Ruin shuffle. So, I believe, I'm not 100% on this, but I think the Experimental Frenzy is not back in the hand.
Right.
So we did get rid of a module, and we got rid of the Frenzy. And are we going to actually survive the turn?
Goes for Helix on a servo.
Yeah. Well, it's not going to kill the... He has to stay alive. He can't even kill the Nexus. And there is a Welding Jar, which would keep the token alive, but... the damage wouldn't go through, so I don't expect we'll see that used here. We are going to see a Nature's Claim to prevent the Lightning Helix gaining life, which, barring anything else, will put Jonathan down to 1.
Wow.
That's the... So, actually, the question then was, would Tommy, from before, was... I'm sorry, I bashed my microphone again. I don't know if you guys can hear that or not. Would Tommy save the Nature's Claims forever on the assumption that Stony Silence would show up, or at some point would he just cast them on other things?
When you're this ahead.
Yeah, right.
Stony Silence would kind of make Tommy laugh at this point.
Yeah, so we see... now, did we see there... I'm sorry, did we see Lightning Helix on the token, Nature's Claim to kill the token response, Lightning Helix again on the same token?
We did.
We did, and I feel that's a mistake because we could have resulted in both tokens being killed instead of one.
Could have just shot the other one, yeah.
Yeah. However, it's is moot. Tommy Tomsovic and his Hardened Scales are going to sweep this match. And what I would say was highly entertaining.
Very highly entertaining. We had a little bit of a back and forth. Hobbs clawing his way to try and kind of regain control of that game. But Tommy Tomsovic just generating infinite value every single turn. Was able to come over the top of the control deck. Jonathan Hobbs going to take his first loss in this tournament, and the first round of Modern is in completion.